My name is Noreen Clancy, and I'm here in my capacity as chair of 50/50 Northwest. Look, it's fantastic to see such a wonderful crowd here. Anyway, it's great to be here on this very, very important occasion, and I'm going to hand you over to the Cathaoirleach, Sean McGowan, to do the official welcome.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, yeah. I go in behind the podium here, just lay my notes down, hiding behind you all. Good evening, everybody. Mairead McGuinness, MEP, fellow councillors from lovely Leitrim, and I believe there's some here from Cavan as well. You're all very welcome here to this event here this evening. This year is the 100th anniversary of the Votes for Women, and as part of Votal 100 events, we commemorate tonight the life and times of Mary Reynolds, Leitrim's first female TD, wife of Paddy Reynolds, TD, mother of Pat Joe Reynolds, TD, and grandmother of Jerry Reynolds, who was also a TD. I'm delighted as Cathaoirleach of Leitrim County Council to be here this evening and to celebrate with you the contribution of Leitrim's first female TD. Getting elected as a TD in the 1930s was a tough task by any standards, but to face a general election after losing her husband and being responsible for looking after a very young family was certainly a brave undertaking by Mary Reynolds. Travelling to Dublin, spending over 3 days a week away from home, and then at weekends travelling around Leitrim and Sligo hinterland, attending meetings and clinics, was a formidable job and demonstrated public servants at his best. Remember, Mrs. Reynolds fought 3 elections between 1938 and 44 in and around World War II at a very critical time in our history, and was very successfully re-elected, achieving just short of 25% of the vote in 1944, which was indeed a massive achievement. It must also be remembered, Mary was elected just 10 years after the foundation of the state. A new country with little or no money, with infrastructure devastated following the War of Independence and mass immigration, especially here from the west of Ireland. Yet despite that, she fought hard for her constituents and campaigned for new schools, improved healthcare and housing for Leitrim, and she had many successes along the way. During some of those years, my party, Fianna Fáil, held power under the leadership of Eamon De Valera as Taoiseach, while Mary, as a TD for Fine Gael, sat on the opposition benches. Despite this, I am reliably informed that they had a good working relationship, maybe more so than with some of his own deputies indeed. This resulted in numerous stories of people who had reason to contact Mary seeking assistance regarding some difficult issues and getting them resolved satisfactorily without any fuss or fanfare. I suppose winning on 9 separate occasions says it all, really, and it was a testament to her work and service to the people of this county and beyond. Apart from politics, Mary developed a family hardware and grocery business, which provided jobs and supplies to this town. Again, it's incredible to think that she could combine her role as a mother, a politician, and a businesswoman, and evidently be successful at all 3. As chairman of Leitrim County Council, I would like to mention also of our family's legacy to this county, and in particular the fact that both her son and grandson served in this role as Cathaoirleach of Leitrim County Council, and collectively served Leitrim County Council for 70 years, with Pat Joe serving continuously for 12 years as Cathaoirleach. This collective contribution of public service by the Reynolds family to Leitrim must be acknowledged tonight also. In conclusion, Mary Reynolds was a diligent, respected representative for the people of Leitrim and Sligo, a businesswoman, mother who saw herself as a servant of the people, for the people, working for and representing this county to the very best of her ability. As we celebrate 100 years of women gaining the right to vote, We all, as politicians, aspire to serve those who vote for us, either men or women, with the same principles and ethics of Mary Reynolds. Thank you all very much.
Thanks very much, Sean, for those words. And just to say, Mary asked me to read out. There's two apologies for this evening's event. One's from Enda Kenny, Deputy Enda Kenny, who sent a message to say he couldn't be with us here at this very important event this evening. And also a letter that Mary asked me to read out from Deputy Charlie Flanagan, Minister for Equality, Justice and Equality. Dear Mary, I understand that a very special event is taking place in Ballinamore Library on Friday, 30th of November. I want to acknowledge the great role of the late Mary Reynolds in both local and national politics. She holds a great record in the Sligo-Leitrim constituency, and winning 9 out of 10 elections was a great achievement for herself and her family. Mary Reynolds was a great friend of my late father, who served in the Dáil with her, and I recall hearing from him on the many interesting conversations they both had over the years. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening on Friday. Kindest regards, yours sincerely, Charlie Flanagan. So nice. Okay, so the format, Mary asked me would I kind of do MC for this evening. So after I'll say a few words just about the context and vote all 100. Then we'll hear from Mary herself and granddaughter of Mary Reynolds, and also from Mary's eldest granddaughter. We have Mary Savage here from Mullingar. And then we have, delighted to have the MEP, Mairead McGuinness. And then finally, Jerry Reynolds, grandson, is that right? Grandson. Jerry will give the closing speech. Okay. So it's great to have all the Reynolds clan here tonight to commemorate Mary's role. Just to say a little bit about the Vote All 100. This is a government initiative to commemorate women's suffrage and the role of women in politics. I was involved in just 2 weeks ago in a major event in Sligo. Actually, the Leitrim Observer gave it great coverage, where we had Hannah Shee Skeffington's granddaughter and Helen Pankhurst's granddaughter actually talking about the role the suffragettes played and the struggle that they fought in order for us to have the vote today. So I think it's important to acknowledge the work, and sometimes we can take it for granted that we have the vote, but and it's hard to believe that it is 100 years ago. So the Vote All is a government initiative to mark this important centenary. And this was the passing of the Representation of the People Act. I suppose it's important to remember that it was just in 1918 women over 30 got the vote, not all women. And it was women who owned their own property, were the wives of property owners, or were academics. It was not until 1922 that all women over 21 got the right to vote. And it was in the UK, it was in 1928. And I suppose it's also good to remember that when we look at Mary Reynolds, just the circumstances and the context, because this was she was elected in 1932, and in 1933 the marriage bar came in until 1973. And for example, this was where women, once they got married, and I'm sure some of you in the audience might remember this, had to stop working. So if you were a teacher, you had to stop working and give up your job. So it's interesting and it's useful to remember that women were not supposed to be in public life for all of those years. And I suppose that somehow explains as well why we have so few women in politics today. And it is quite shocking to think that 100 years later we have only ever had 2 women represent Sligo-Leitrim constituency. Mary Reynolds, who we're commemorating tonight, and Marion Harkin was the second woman who represented us from 2002 until 2007 for 5 years before she went to Europe. And I think I was telling this to my nieces and they just couldn't believe it. You know, we assume, that you know, it's surely we've had more women than that represent us. So I think it is important to remember these statistics, but also to remember that we have made huge progress. That you know, now we have actually the highest number of women in the Dáil. It's at 22%. So we have 35 women now in the Dáil. Progress is slow. We wish it was faster, but hopefully we'll see a few more women running in the next local elections and get more women onto Leitrim County Council. So I'd just like to now ask Mary to say a few words. Mary is the granddaughter and who has to be commended for organising this wonderful event tonight. And then after Mary, we'll have Mary Savage, who will talk also about her grandmother.
Thank you very much. As Noreen said, you're all very welcome here. I'm delighted it's such a big crowd. I was saying to myself and my family and Gerard and Ita and all that, look, it might be 20 or whatever, and hopefully we'll have a few, you know. So to have this crowd, it's absolutely wonderful, and thank you all very much. And just to add to the welcomes from Noreen, Mairead and Sean, our Cathaoirleach, and our MEP. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that Maria Walsh has joined us, our former 2014 Rose. And I'd also, Dr. John Logan is here, the historian, and John knows this building particularly well, shall we say. So those of us from Ballinamore will know that John knows this building well. Now, well, we're here tonight to celebrate the life and times of my grandmother, Mary Reynolds, and I'm delighted to be one of her grandchildren. The life and times of Mary Reynolds is rather unique, and she has played a very large part in our history in the Northwest. I have laboured unselfishly in furthering the individual and collective interests of my constituents, which efforts have met with a large measure of success. Those are the words of Mary Reynolds from her 1954 election speech. Mary was born on the 10th of October in 1889 in the townland of Drumcora. And of course I have all the supporters from Drumcora here as usual. They're always great supporters. She received her primary education at Gorthahoose National School and later attended the Convent of Mercy in Ballinamore. After school she emigrated to America and married a Leitrim man, Paddy Reynolds, from Drummuchty, Gorva. And they got married on the 5th of October, 1915. There are lots of things written about Paddy Reynolds, but not a lot of people realise that Paddy was actually a trained national school teacher. He studied at Marlborough Street from 1909 to 1911. And he actually taught in a Doon National School, Gorva, before emigrating to the USA. His two brothers, John and Francis, had emigrated earlier to the USA. They joined the US Army. They were killed in France during the war. So Mary and her husband lived on the Lower East Side in America, New York. Two of their children, Mary and John, or Johnny as we called him, or I often heard my mother and all of the rest of them calling him Johnny, were born there. And then after a while, I think Johnny was 6 months and Mary was 3. Am I right, Mary? They decided to return to Ireland in 1919. And they settled and they bought a small farm at Keeldren. Paddy's father was ill and he wanted to see his grandchildren. In 1926, they moved into Ballinamore. They bought a shop, a grocer and a spirit merchant business premises in Ballinamore from a family named Flynn. So this is the second time the Flynns own the business. So it's in the Flynn name. Did you know that, Ita? Good. The couple now have 7 children, and I don't think I have them in order. Mary, Johnny, Patjo, Nellie was my mother, Gerard, Francis and Kevin. Paddy Reynolds entered politics in 1927 and was elected for Cumann Gael in the Sligo Leitrim constituency. He was re-elected in 1928. He was nominated to contest the next election, which was the 1932 general election, and it was during that time that life changed forever for the Reynolds family and his family. On the eve of the election, a Sunday evening, the 14th of February, St. Valentine's Day, 1932, word reached the Reynolds house that Paddy had been fatally shot while out canvassing. In fact, it was the priest who knocked on the door and said, "Mrs. Reynolds, your husband has been shot dead." And I remember my mother telling us they were all waiting for him to come in from canvassing. They'd had their dinner, and his dinner was in the oven. So that was the news they got. The election in Sligo Leitrim was postponed for 2 weeks to allow a candidate be chosen. After much persuasion and soul searching on her part, Mary Reynolds allowed her name to go forward. After all, her choices were limited. She had a young family to care of. She had a business to run. There was no widow's pension, so life was tough. Mary was elected to the 7th Dáil and joined fellow Cumann na Gael TD Margaret Collins O'Driscoll, sister of the late Michael Collins. She narrowly lost her seat in 1933, but returned to the Dáil in 1937. And she was re-elected on the 9th, the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th and 16th Dáil until she retired in 1961. Now that was some record. And you'll see it all over there. This was an incredible record of achievement for a female politician in those times. She was followed by her son Patjo, who was a councillor, a senator, a TD, and was Cathaoirleach of the Seanad. He was followed by his son Gerard, who became a councillor, a senator, and a TD also. Mary was a personable and unassuming woman. She proved tireless in her efforts on behalf of her constituents. Her Dáil contributions were mainly confined to parliamentary questions. And in fact, we can see some of her hard work reflected in the infrastructure built throughout Leitrim. And a selection of her parliamentary questions are there on the board, which you probably have seen, or if not, you can see them later on. That was the way it was at the time for women. They didn't speak very much in the Dáil, but they took their seat and they attended and sat. She was a very hard-working lady. She never forgot her roots or the people who voted for her. She worked tirelessly for the people and with the people of Sligo and Leitrim. She was always regarded as being dignified, and she had the air of dignity, composure and decency. She always went directly to the doors of those concerned to make representations on behalf of her constituents. And in fact, she was well known. She frequently visited Dublin hospitals to visit people. People down here would ask her to go and visit because perhaps they were unable to visit. And she always came back with how the people were or were able to tell them reports on the progress of the patients in the hospitals. At a time when politics was very much the preserve of men, even more so than now, Mary proved herself as a very able politician in a man's world. Mary was a very religious woman. She was a daily mass goer, and her strong faith sustained her through difficult times. From the troubled years of the 1930s until the early 60s, Mary Reynolds was a unifying voice in politics. Mary was a real hero and a trailblazer here in the Northwest, and her legacy should not be forgotten. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary. We'll now call on Mary Reynolds' eldest granddaughter, Mary Savage.
Thanks very much. I'm not quite as organised as Mary. I have notes half scribbled here, but I think I'll try and talk without the notes. I just want to talk about my grandmother as the woman I remember as I grew up, as I was a child, and I was the eldest of all her grandchildren. The two things that stand out for my grandmother, for me, is that she was a woman of the people. She was a country woman, never forgot her roots in the country and in the land. And even though she lived in the States, she still had such a regard for the land, for the people of the land, and for everybody in this community and in this constituency. She was a woman of great faith, and they're the two things of all that I would remember about her. When Mary says she visited the hospitals, you know, people hadn't cars, and it wasn't that easy for people to get to Dublin to visit the hospitals. And I remember she always had a big handbag, and there were always packets of cigarettes. She went to the hospitals and she brought cigarettes. I mean, the worst thing she could do, but with hindsight, we know that. At that time, we didn't know that. So it was her way of going in, visiting people, and bringing them something that they would find useful, or she thought was useful.